So I just want to ask you like about your life, how you decided to switch to, not usual uh, way of living, like no other people. As far as I understand, you're not an employee somewhere. You're doing your own business, and it looks like this business is really interesting. And we can even say that this business might change the world.
Yeah, thank you, Sergey. Good afternoon. I'm honored to be talking with you today, and um, it's been a passion for me to. I guess if I were to put it in a bumper sticker, I'd say try to find a way to work for the land instead of working for the man. If you can figure that out, then you're golden because there's so much. Uh, there's a lot of financial opportunity and a lot of spiritual rewards for making a living in what you could call a right livelihood by earning money to make a living, working with the land. So I've trained with a lot of people, and I've worked in other people's businesses, and I'm still kind of a gypsy too. So it's good, having a skill set that's in service to the earth. Um, you're always in demand, and if you have a good network and references, you can pretty much always find some level of work. So I encourage anybody watching or listening to invest in the Earth Bank and get some Earth skills to get a little bit liberated from the man. Start
Mhm.
working for the land.
So how long are you doing it?
Now I guess I started working in various types of green businesses going back over 10 years in different parts of the environmental movement. From um, different kinds of political campaigns that were professional and different kinds of green businesses, recycling companies, and whatnot. And it's been a few years doing nonprofit work a lot as well. And so yeah, it's been over a decade, kind of wearing a bunch of different hats.
So okay, so is this work for profit right now? Yes.
Right now, yes,
Okay, what kind of non-profit work did you do?
I ran a youth eco art gallery in Long Beach for about a year and a half. We had this amazing location in the downtown district, and we were able to get donations from the local farmers market and train youth on how to grow food, how to process food, and other resources coming from the urban waste stream, and turn that into art and turn it into compost and other forms of useful material that we could the words upcycle back into the economy, so that we could actually have you know a run our own community center. And kind of, it was mostly a punk rock kind of subculture that was involved, and we were doing kind of, there's a lot of things called Food Not Bombs. That's a really well established global organization that where a lot of, I guess you could say, countercultural people are involved in charitable work, and are able to access some of the resources that come with operating as a nonprofit. So it was fun. We got a lot of cool donations, and we got a lot of support, and it was a big part of my sort of evolution and learning process. And yeah,
Is
there's a
this
trade-off, but yeah.
is this thing exist still?
No, not really. The we had a This is interesting for people to know. If anyone's interested in starting a nonprofit, there's kind of like a intermediate route that you can go called getting a fiscal sponsor or being fiscally sponsored. It means that if you don't have the funds or the sort of other resources, time, energy, and expertise that it requires to establish a 501c3 nonprofit organization, there's these things called fiscal sponsors, and they're organizations that exist either solely to provide an umbrella for different projects to be able to operate as a nonprofit organization under the umbrella of a parent organization,
Mhm.
or the well, I guess to simplify it, there are organizations that exist solely to provide that umbrella to smaller projects, and then there are, like, say, um, an established 501c3 that's doing some sort of work in your area of interest. They might actually let you operate under their status as a sub project of their own, their own work. So, technically, you could be anybody out. This is kind of more advice, but if you could be anybody out there with an idea and a project, and you want to start, getting donations and public, holding events and gathering folks to raise awareness. And even for like one event, you could actually operate and take donations and in a lot of ways make use of that status just by sort of nesting within a larger organization. So that's one route to go about it. And then the other thing is actually filing and doing that full-on 501c3 status, which I haven't gone through that whole process myself. I've heard it can be, I've heard mixed things about it, and so I'm glad that I went that route. But when your question is, it still running today? That was kind of a side note. The fiscal sponsor that we had actually ended up dissolving, and at that point, I decided that I didn't want to continue on that route for a lot of reasons. Mm-hmm. It's just a lot of, I guess it's a lot of liability in different ways, but I don't know if you want to go into that. I don't know if you're interested in the nuts and bolts of for-profit versus non-profit in the environmental sector, but
yeah, I understand. So if somebody provides you with money, then they try to limit your possibilities.
Well, there's always that. I guess you could say if you're reliant on grants for your funding, or some sort of budget from a finite source, you're always at risk of being cut when a budget is cut, or if the grant isn't renewed. It's always kind of a stressful place to be. And actually, when we were doing this was way before. Well, I don't know about way before, but it was the web was not exactly what it is today in terms of all these crowdsourced funding websites like Indiegogo and GoFundMe, and there's even a permaculture one. I can't remember the name of it right now, but specifically for funding permaculture projects. So now I'm excited about that actually, because you can avoid all that liability of essentially if you form a nonprofit organization, all of your assets, all your intellectual property, all that stuff can be. It's you don't technically own it; it becomes part of the public domain. So there's a lot of, I guess you could say, red tape and whatnot involved with that. And so to be able to do any project now and just fire up your friend network and social media and get crowdsourced funding that is separate from all that oversight and all of that red tape is actually, it's a blessing. I've had several things I wanted to use that for, and I probably will get around to it sometime soon, but I've been actually just focused on other things. So
you're about to start such a campaign on some site like Indiegogo?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about it, in order to get it to work properly, you really have to, right now, I'm actually more focusing on building my network and my sort of tribe, as it's called, talk about that in internet marketing and whatnot. It's like, if you put your campaign up and you don't really have a strong social network, social media, then it's not going to be as strong or as assured that you're going to get that funding, all supplied. So I'm myself, rather than jump right into doing a campaign, I'm actually trying to catch up to a lot of this social media stuff. I've been kind of out of the loop for a while, just dug into various projects, and I'm kind of catching up to that part of reality right now, actually.
So what kind of people are you looking for right now?
Well, I guess in the permaculture community, or the sustainable urban development, ecological design, those are more broad terms. I'm personally working on a few innovations that are still in the sort of tinkering phase, I guess you could say. I'm not quite ready to roll out product lines with what I have been kind of in a lab mode with.
Mm-hmm.
So I hopefully will, within the next few months, have sort of perfected a modular, you could call it, edible island water gardening system. I won't bore you with the details and the mechanics of it, but without without boring you with the details, I could say that for me personally, I feel like blessed to have um, this implementation of aquaculture and different kind of classic survivalist strategies for food security and water storage, like putting together a modular system that can be rapidly deployed in an emergency situation in any environment. Pretty much it's not frozen, and
Mhm.
something that could be ornamental and applied for daily, normal, regular use. If you want, we can talk about just water gardening in general and why that's important. I have lots to say about that. I'm just kind of going wherever we go with the flow. So,
Yeah, yeah. I just wondering. Let's say, just imagine. Let's say a couple of people having your technology and your skills appear on some island with no other people. Could
mhm.
they survive there and live there? Actually.
Well, it's that makes me think of the what is that? The Mana machine. This the Ancient Alien series is talking about how you could culture different forms of microbiology and get all your nutrients uh, at a low level of the food chain. It's not quite that type of system where it would be. It's kind of more like a emergency. It would provide an emergency food and water supply to get a family, let's say, through the interim between a disaster situation where there could be, water or electricity or food, shortage, or utilities interrupted and food supply interrupted. You would have this fertility, food, and water storage kind of modular system that could just be tucked away somewhere, even in like a driveway or a backyard or front yard, and actually guarantee a number of days, weeks, and even months, depending on the scale of the system that's built, of home scale resilience, self sufficiency, and food security, water security, which a lot of people are lacking. And in California, there's a major drought, and of course, in Southern California, there's the looming threat of the way overdue big major earthquake. So,
Hmm.
um, yeah, that's
Okay, so your system is not supposed to replace any other current systems with providing, I mean, food, water, and anything like that. It's just a emergency system. Yeah.
well. This is the beauty and the elegance of, you could say, the synthesis of permaculturists and survivalists. And maybe you could say people who are um, concerned about, or people who are worried about what happens when the stuff hits the fan and the zombies are roaming the streets. How are we going to survive a disaster, of any scale? And those people are generally focused on storing things in buckets, storing water in tanks,
Mm-hmm.
and having their supplies for weeks, months, or even years, or even decades. Um, on site or stashed in various caches and whatnot, and that gives them a certain number of, like you say, days forward to feel confident with what they have to make it through, tough times, or whether it's own personal financial issues, if they have that happening, like a job loss or um, an injury or something that or unexpected health expense. They could be the world could be functioning business as usual all around them, but
Mm-hmm.
they could be suffering a personal crisis of some kind that forces them to lose income or have income, tightened so that they can do themselves a favor and have on-site storage of food, water, medicine, tools, implements for energy and whatnot. So that's the sort of typical survival mindset, is to have a bunch of stuff accessible to get through an acute period. And then conversely, you have, say, people who are into permaculture or longer term perennial homesteading or market gardening, perennial horticulture, I'm trying to get away from the jargon words here, but just to set up that continuum where the permaculture folks have a lot to offer the survivalists, and the survivalists have a lot to offer the permaculturists, because they both are specializing in providing solutions for self-sufficiency at different time scales, and they both are necessary. You want to be able to get through an acute disaster, and if your nut trees aren't producing yet, for you to survive on, it's going to take, potentially, it will take a long time depending on a lot of the trees. The time to produce can be quite a while, so you might want to have some stored nuts and some stored dried fruits and whatever you like to eat that's storable to get you through that period. So I've been kind of educating folks and bring part of this movement to synthesize these two kind of tendencies, the long-term strategy for sustainability and the short-term strategy for acute disaster situations, and making them flow together. And so really the beauty and elegance of when that actually works well together is that it's the old paradigm of survivalism would be, oh no, we don't know, 2012, Y2K, whatever, something is going to be the end of the world as we know it, and so we better have a palette of food that we normally wouldn't eat in the garage, and that's just going to take up space, and we're just going to be sitting there waiting for the apocalypse. Whereas a more homesteader type strategy would be to rotate bulk quantities of what you normally like to eat and have preparedness and long-term supplies and storage just worked into your normal routine. So your quality of life actually increases by having a survival mindset and just living more like our recent ancestors who, weren't as spoiled by technology and by fossil fuels and the information age. They had to learn skills. They had to know how to, they had to do like what the ant and the grasshopper story conveys. You got to prepare for winter, and you'll be ahead of the game that way. So going back to what we were talking about, the kind of systems that I'm trying to devise for, urban solutions that bridge the gap. It's kind of like you want to have, if you're going to have water storage, make it furniture, or put the buckets of food under the table and the tablecloth so that you're stacking functions, and you're not creating a nuisance or a blockage in your system. You're not like accumulating a bunch of stuff. People are going, "You're crazy. You think it's the end of the world." You can make furniture out of it. You can store your own seeds. You can make. You don't have to be like apocalyptic in your thinking or your aesthetic. So there's a lot of. I'm not like the expert interior or interior designer, but I know I've had the privilege of working with some pretty high level designers who really see the potential of taking the nuts and bolts and mechanics of the survivalist mindset and changing up the camo aesthetic and the military surplus aesthetic, which I'm a fan of, but like a lot of people will say that's limiting your marketability and your audience if you look like Rambo and you're trying to your property looks like a bunker and you look like you're a zealot, a religious zealot or something, like a extremist of some kind. There's a more, I don't want to say hip, but there's like a more feng shui, just a more aesthetically pleasing way to synthesize these lifestyles. Like, for example, you're going to do different stuff in your backyard than in your front yard, because the neighborhood sees the front yard and you want them to feel comfortable and you want to ease them into the new paradigm or the old paradigm of a home being a homestead that's productive and has a net productive value, as opposed to just being a money sink and energy sink. It just, you're paying for it and it's just sucking you dry, and meanwhile you're poisoning the soil and overwatering the grass until it's flooding the street, and all of your capital, well, a significant portion of it is going into a, a dysfunctional system that just takes and doesn't give back the way that we're doing it now. But, the transitioning into the older paradigm where it was, to have a tomato plant in your yard that's just doing its thing, and maybe it's growing above the strict, vegetation height limits in certain municipalities and whatnot. It's like it's an interesting art form, bringing back that aesthetic in a way that people can ease into, and also bringing in the survival mindset and the culture, the subculture of survivalism has a lot of ex-military people. To tell you the truth, that's where it came from. I mean, we wouldn't have the survivalist movement if we didn't have veterans who were forced to rely on their trained and improvised survival skills out behind enemy lines where the stuff has hit the fan for their operation, and they're out there relying on their wits and their gear, and I'm not a prior service person. I have not served in that way. I do consider myself a spiritual warrior, for the record, but I support the soldier, but I don't necessarily support the orders that they're given in general. But I'll say the political stuff. But I'll just say that I have to pay homage to the military personnel who have brought that tactical and strategic mindset for survival, and it's been a fringe thing for many, many decades, but it's really starting to, I want to say it's getting mainstream, but it's so commonsensical, and so it should be so commonsensical that demonization or stereotyping of the crazy survivalists, in the woods or in the mountains or whatever, in the bunker. That's just that typical tendency to make extreme, try to pigeonhole and make stereotypes and paint a picture of extremists. So, I mean, I'm going to go into the agenda of the 1% or whatever, but the more self-reliant, self-sufficient we become, the less dependent we are. And I'll just leave that at that before I go up too far on the soapbox.
Yeah, I understand. So, I mean, taking into account all these issues with food and water that exist right now in our world, so how are you seeing the future of your idea? So, should it be only for uh, people uh, who have some survival mindset, uh, or should it be also for everybody to just start to not consume only the products? I mean, going to the shops and markets and everything like that, but also people having your skills and information will try to contribute. I mean, to plant the food in their yards or even at home, and then contribute to people, for instance, who don't have enough food, and then will make the whole situation with food and water more stable and less frightening, because right now there is lots of conversation regarding that our Earth will not be able to support that amount of people, and then so what? Should we leave just a golden billion, and then, or not? Or we have possibilities of using such systems, such ideas as yours, to actually grow enough food for us, and then everybody could participate in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. It's the responsibility of the survival-minded folks and of the sustainability-minded folks to do the outreach and organize and share this knowledge and provide accessibility to the trainings, and and create robust for-profit businesses, and create nonprofit organizations and do charity work and just on every front work in the religious communities of faith. They have a ton of real estate that's not being productive. I mean, I think the lowest hanging fruit for a paradigm shift towards local food production, including aquaculture, animal systems, insect culture, um, and of course all the types of all the different stripes of organic gardening and all those different methodologies. The real low hanging fruit would be not the public parks. Not to say that shouldn't be done at all, but compared, the amount of just say red tape as a nice way to say it. The amount of red tape that there is in order to get anything happening in public space is extremely like cost and time prohibitive for people who aren't like living off a trust fund or something, or they're employed by the government to run programs like to do green urban development and stuff. So what is accessible and what has a very I think very hopeful and bright potential future is networking with the communities of faith who have lots of temples, synagogues, churches, all types of facilities, and they have most of the time built in an ethic of service as part of their spiritual tradition. So, if you were to think of like you asked the question, how could we, what would be the fastest way to get the United States feeding itself?
For instance, yeah.
Right. Just starting there, if I were asked that question, I would say, let's go and create a package, a sort of a presentation package tailored to each different type of faith. Study their texts and their spiritual beliefs and philosophies and scriptures, and direct them towards their inherent, usually very explicit responsibility under their own texts to be stewards of the earth and to honor creation and to leave the earth in a state better than where you came into it. So I think that there's a need for branching out into these cultural sectors or these layers of society where there's a lot of power, influence, and money. And if you had the spiritual authority figures leading by example and saying, okay, everybody, today we're going to do this outside and we're going to plant some stuff. And that's going to be the lesson, or that's going to be, integrate all these people who are gathering in these facilities, integrate them into a functional ecosystemic design that's their community center, and the homeless and hungry people that they feed as part of their duty as servants to charitable work would actually be, they all would be better served if instead of feeding, homeless, poor, hungry people toxic, dead food. I mean, if you look at I was homeless at one point in my life, and I remember the food that was fed to us, and it's obesogenic, it's carcinogenic, and I'm trying to be on a roll, but I'll just say, if you were at all crazy or on the edge of being crazy, the food that they're feeding these people exacerbates whatever psychotic issues they may be having or sociopathic issues. It's not conducive to clear thinking, the food that's given out. So the sick perversity or perversion of nature creating haves and have-nots and whatnot, I mean, that's another story, but the irony is that they're killing these people with the food they're feeding them. They're barely keeping them alive. They're basically making them more insane, more agitated, more inflamed, more toxified, and they could be saying, hey, if I'll give you a shovel and some seeds and a book, and you all can get together and build shelters out of the earth, and you can grow your own food, fiber, and fuel to run your own sustainable eco-village on our property, and that would be a glorious way to exemplify the potential to live beautifully on the landscape of Earth in a charitable manner. But it's the whole thing of, do you give someone a fish or a fishing pole? And I believe that that sector is ripe for getting hit up to, you know, not just lament being in one tradition, and I don't want to pigeonhole just one tradition. So, you know, I guess, please forgive me, and don't, no one take this the wrong way, but the Garden of Eden is we are on a garden planet. We can choose to restore the Garden of Eden, and instead of cascading into disaster, lamenting our, you know, being mythically cast out of the Garden of Eden, we could actually, I mean, if I could just put one line in the Bible, it would be, you know, somewhere either at the beginning or the end, and it would say, and you can replant the Garden of Eden. So let's get on with it, you know. And that would be the most graceful thing. If you plant trees, we're going to heaven, baby. Period. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't. You know, that's what needs to happen on this planet. Is we need to reforest, and we can reforest it in a way that is beneficial to all organisms, conducive to much exponentially more life and habitat, and tailored as a designer system that provides for our food needs. So if you're interested, I can give you like a snapshot or overview of the concept of a food forest, which is hinted at in, you know, as the Garden of Eden, a forest that's actually custom engineered for the benefit of our palate and our medicinal needs, and the diets of our animals that we would be sustainably and respectfully working with in our systems. You know, is that something you've heard of, or that you've encountered before, that concept of a food forest?
No, I mean it should be based on forests.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
exactly. Yeah, I'll give you a little breakdown if you're interested. You
Yeah,
know, to
please.
put in context. Yeah, so
Forest, right?
a food forest. Yeah, so you've been in the forest, I'm sure, at some point,
For sure.
right, in your life. So, right, everyone needs to take a forest bath, as they say in Japan. So, what's interesting about, there's a lot of interesting things about a forest ecosystem, and I spent quite a bit of time myself. I grew up in the Northwest, so I was always playing in the forest, and just immersed in that the beauty and bounty of nature. Um, what if you just build in your mind the vision, the visual in your mind's eye of what a forest looks like? Um, one thing you'll notice is that not everything that you're looking at in you know, normal, like a memory of being in a forest, you may recognize a few things that are edible. If you're a survivalist, or you know, you do wild crafting, or you're a bushcrafter, or whatever different, you know, name you could give yourself, or an indigenous person living in an intact way, you know, as an ancestral manner, you're going to be able to identify a lot of edible things in a normal, say, well, let's say natural, healthy forest ecosystem. What a food forest is all about is the idea that if we reverse engineer that, you know, that forest ecosystem in a very sort of, I don't want to say crude, but I would say a very basic manner, we can reverse engineer what we're looking at when we're looking at a forest, and we can say there's no reason why these different species in that forest couldn't be plugged in place by human hands and a human design consciousness that would select varieties that interact and function in a similar manner relative to each other, but instead of being only one edible species in some ratio of many others that aren't edible or useful to us, we could actually design a forest ecosystem that is self-perpetuating, self-hydrating, self-fertilizing. The annual plants will reseed themselves because they're in chronically moist and fertile conditions, shaded by the canopy of the larger trees. protected in a deep layer of leaf and mulch and litter and carcasses of animals and all kinds of different bird droppings. And I mean, the forest floor is this magical place of extremely dense, healthy biology when it's allowed to do its thing. And if you think of the planet Earth as a forest-generating machine,
Mm-hmm.
when we get out of the way, a forest will be made, even if 100,000 or a million years ago, the area was under the ocean or it was at top of a mountain.
Mm-hmm.
The urge, the program, the desire of the planet Earth to make forests is this universal constant. So whenever the conditions are right for it, it will just wire itself together. So when we look at our very distinctive capacity to design and plan and to build systems, with powers and abilities that most other species that we know of on Earth, don't have the combination of powers that we have that give us the ability to actually create designer ecosystems. So next time you look at a picture of a forest or you're in the forest, you could actually say to yourself that there's like a couple different layers of heights of trees, and you could maybe think, well, there could be the tall species is more of a longer living tree crop that if you were to plant, it would be there, for hundreds of years. It'd be multiple generations, and then under that, you can see lower standing trees, and those can be cycled out more frequently, grow more fast, and have various degrees of production.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have shrubs that you're going to see in there, and you could be growing berries, you could be growing all different kinds of medicinal and edible and species that are edible for animals. Again, as I said, it doesn't have to be all human food, but you got vines, you've got crops that grow under the ground in the soil, tubers and whatnot, different root crops. You have things that grow laterally or horizontally across the surface of the ground, and you have the less woody and more kind of softer herbaceous plants. And if I'm not missing anything, those are, I believe, there are set. Those are, I hope I had this in the right or the right number, but 7 typical layers that are going to be universally identifiable in any forest you go into. And that doesn't even count the multiple levels of aquatic systems that are often inside those forests. So that's so much opportunity that we have to stand on the back of the ultimate engineer, nature, the giant,
Mm-hmm.
stand on the back of giants. Nature is the ultimate engineer, creates zero waste,
Mm-hmm.
is extremely, is able to take solar energy in the form of photons, capture it through the process of photosynthesis, and then bounce it around many, many different times in these elaborate webs of producers, consumers, and decomposers, so that solar energy that in our normal farm system where you're just growing, corn, soybean, other grains and legumes, cash crops, that sunlight is wasted on most of that area,
Mm-hmm.
bouncing off the dead soil, oversaturating the plants and causing them, health problems
Mm-hmm.
and thus pushing the cycle of pest and disease and whatnot. Um, so now I'm kind of jumping over into the comparison or the juxtaposition of how densely productive and how hands-off a forest ecosystem is. And if we were only to reverse engineer some of those layers and go, well, we can put an edible vine here, a medicinal herbaceous plant here, an edible root crop there, and functionally interrelate them in proximities that are going to make them sing as a chorus, as what's often called guilds.
Mm-hmm.
They create functional benefits for each other naturally. They create different little microclimates. Some plants shade other plants. Some plants provide nutrients through their root systems to plants that need nitrogen, for example. Nature's been at this for a long time, and it would behoove us to actually integrate ourselves into these functional ecosystems to get our basic needs met and to flourish and to live in a healthy manner. So the food forest is the hipster district of the future, where
Wow.
we want to be striving to be surrounded by a massive density of useful, productive, designer forest ecosystem, products that we're intelligently designing to benefit from. And it's really, you compare the productivity of a forest in terms of the biomass versus, a field of some sort of crop that only is, they throw away the mulchable, compostable waste, product from whatever isn't the vegetable they're selling or the fruit they're selling or the seed or the nut or whatever. They discard that as trash. It becomes a pollution problem down the road somewhere else. And they're only producing one product per year on this cycle, and they're not stacking and infinitely exponentially multiplying the productive potential by creating multiple vertical layers and all kinds of different visible and invisible dynamics of value that you can't measure. Like, you can't talk to an investor and go, I'm going to make a permaculture food forest and it's going to provide immeasurable value as an educational tool, as a learning facility, as a
Hmm.
as a venue for events, as a productive farm, as a place for niche business opportunities for people who want to make specialized products out of other people's waste stream products in a little cottage industry village of production. I mean, there's so much we can do, so much we've always done
Hmm.
as forest dwelling, hunter gatherer and horticultural apes. It's just the aesthetic and the value system. And do you want to live in a glorified prison cell that you have the privilege of having a key to? If you're not actually incarcerated in a real prison, you're in the urban prison without walls where you get to have a key to your own cell. And that's like, some people would argue one of the, it's like uh, not a lot better in certain places and circumstances. So
So yeah,
I
so you're talking about turning a forest to actual city for people, yeah?
Well, yeah. I mean, the ethics of specifically looking at permaculture design, it's you don't want to displace more wild nature. You wouldn't go into a forest and then try to mess with it in a way that was, uh, let's say, causing a negative impact. That's kind of vague, but there's deeper protocols and procedures about this, what's called zonation. But to put it simply, we we can install food forests in the urban landscape, even leveraging the structures that we've built, and you don't have to knock down everything and exert a bunch of extra energy to retrofit the urban landscape. There's already plenty of poorly managed and used open space. There's plenty of rooftop space.
Hmm.
There's plenty of trellising that can be done. And if we look at a technique called espalier, it's a way to actually grow trees in a healthy and very productive manner by sort of pinning them to a flat surface so that they grow more like a vine.
Hmm.
So that's a lot of surface area. The rooftop surface area, the walls for vines that can be, easily adapted towards more vertical growing space, and of course all of the public green space, that does exist. It's a luxury. It's sort of what's the word, a form of real avarice and narcissism to have this belief that a green grass lawn year round is a status symbol, and it's become this infection of thinking that has displaced natural ecosystems and is a constant toxic input requirement system. Well, it doesn't have to be, but it typically has become that, and it's a constant uh, sink for fossil fuel energy to keep grass at a certain height without animals. If you want grass to be, managed, then you bring in livestock,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
they will, if grazed in a proper manner, they're going to expertly manage the landscape and make it productive. So, you know, I don't know how long, I don't know what the catalyst will be. Hopefully, it's not a sharp, acute need to convert landscape overnight, because that's going to be painful. But there are models in place of urban food forests. Seattle, Washington has a public urban food forest as part of a larger park that I've visited, and it's a kind of a flagship for a paradigm shift in public urban planning policy, where coalitions can be built of local stakeholders, community organizations, government organizations, and I mean, I don't know off the top of my head what all different groups were involved, but I know it was a pretty significant and diverse consortium of different interested parties. So, but like I said, that's going the public sector route is a very slow, arduous process that I have. I've had some experience myself dealing with that kind of stuff, zoning and redevelopment plans, and the constant looming threat in the urban environment of your carpet being pulled out from under your feet by some higher economic force that is able to just muscle the hippies around,
Mm-hmm.
or the migrant workers around, and it's just a kind of this game of cat and mouse trying to do this stuff. But that's again, it goes back to the religious facilities. Uh, they could have a lot of production going on there. So um,
Yeah,
so
so the idea is not to use existing forests to integrate food forests into them, but to just use more of current urban space, yeah, and for instance rooftops, as you said, and turn them into food forests that will actually provide us with food mainly.
exactly, yeah, and like I said, many other values and benefits that aren't typically measured when assessing the square footage of a property or the acreage of a property by, let's say, investors and the people who are playing this game of property management and real estate and whatnot. Like they need training to understand the potential value that we're all missing out on. I mean, it's I've been helping consult with real estate agents to kind of equip and tool them with the skills and the language that they're going to want to have when a potential buyer is looking for property, and more and more they want to be able to homestead on their property. They would like to have some established systems running, maybe you know some basic infrastructure for keeping chickens, or some established productive fruit or nut trees, or even there's a marketplace for turnkey permaculture sites, or just say homesteads that are just ready to take over the systems as they're running, or install like, let's say, the hardscaping is done, and they've built a pond, or they've got a well in place, or they've got rainwater catchment, and just the value system shifting towards that being what people look for in a property to buy or to rent. Is the capacity for it to be conducive to and legally friendly to things like keeping bees and different forms of livestock, and even the height of your front yard vegetation and stuff. So those are all kind of
Yeah.
policy. And
Okay, and I have one question. So, what do you think? Is it possible to use these ideas to gather homeless people and propose them to feed themselves using a food forest, either in the city or in nature?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, I was homeless myself when I was actually pretty young.
Mm-hmm.
I was an early teenager, and there's a lot of opportunity and potential, and there are some case studies to look at for homeless community gardens. There's also a lot of prison gardens, and I've heard, and I don't know if it's just one state, but I've heard that there are cases in which there's policy in place for that, so that if a new prison is built, it has to have a garden implemented in the design for it to be approved as part of the code. So
Hmm.
that's very cool. I think I would love to have uh, green-thumbed ex-cons running around starting green businesses when they go to prison, because they're such plant lovers and soil lovers, and they're reformed by their relationship to the earth. And I know also there's psychotherapeutic value, there's mental health, psychiatric value of various types of psychoactive uh, herbs and other, shall I say, other plants and types of medicinals that can be grown. And I could see absolutely a paradigm shift where the nuisance of all the urine in the urban landscape, why aren't we growing food with that? That's priceless nitrogen. That's liquid gold. And the excrement that piles up, in the cracks of civilization, that is a nuisance and a vector for disease, that can be healthfully, sustainably composted and managed in a way to, for example, be kept for a year or two in isolation. Well, I mean, there's municipalities have the gear and the equipment to be able to like solve all these problems. It's just in a beautiful way, in a fun and beautiful and dare I say, righteous and holy way. Uh, but yeah, I'm actually myself. I had a synchronistic experience not too long ago where I I was at this. I was visiting a friend at this dance club, and I had a couple of drinks, and the good citizen, responsible citizen that I am, I chose to take a walk and be sure that I was absolutely 100% safe to drive
Hmm.
after this club closed, and I made the mistake of sort of expecting I was going to be able to access that parking lot that I parked in, because I'd never had a problem before. But apparently, I chose the wrong one, because when I got there, half an hour later or so, after they closed, the roll-up door was locked down, and it said. Luckily, I was afraid I would get towed, but luckily it said, your cars left overnight will be released at 9 a.m. So I had about 6 hours or so to be forced to re-immerse myself into the psychology of being a sort of night walking homeless person in the way that I was when I was a lot younger, and a lot of things like started coming back to me, and it really kind of forced me to remember how much potential there is to organize. I would call it like a horticultural revolution with all of those people who, if you talk to them and get to know them, they have a story. They had some form of event or cascade of events that, because we're so ratcheted up and so leveraged into these unsustainable living conditions, that one, you could be a doctor, you could be a lawyer, you could be a veteran that served in the armed forces, and have a bad day or two, and your life unravels, and you're on the street, and decades later, you're asking, people for money. You're stuck there. But these are people who have skills. They were, not many of them were born on the street. I mean, not in this country. That's not as often the case as other places. So, the as an anthropological or with an anthropological mindset, seeing how does this culture function? What's the human ecology of this landscape? They've really dialed in a lot of strategies that are actually very efficient and to be learned from and studied. And I mean, I look at a shopping cart and I go, I could turn that into a productive, self-contained, healthy ecosystem pond that produces food and is a source of water and for various uses. And I mean, I could just imagine all these happy, healthy, smiling people who choose not to work for the man,
Mm-hmm.
who are living happily and sustainably. You know, if it's a good climate like in Southern California, you don't really need a shelter for most of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so obviously, there's places where you do. So it's there's a different strategies for those places, but there's a real grace about not paying off a mortgage and not being in the debt
Yeah.
trap hamster wheel. So I see, you know, the I know a lot of very wealthy new age seekers who busy themselves with profiteering so they can keep up with the Joneses at their spiritual church. And they're, I'm not going to condemn anybody, but it's an interesting comparison because the humble people who are just living, like, say, on the street can be more loving and generous and more, quote, spiritual to you than people who are trying to make a fancy lifestyle out of being spiritual. And
Yeah.
we could all work together. The earth needs us all to work together, and we could all be playing different roles in redesigning the urban landscape to be ecologically much more hygienic and productive. And it's just, I think it's just absurd, laughable, and downright embarrassing. When I was down there, and I'm just like, I can't believe I haven't spent more time. I've been wanting to for years. Like, I got to go down to Skid Row and just absorb and observe what is going on. Like, and it was, I just got hit with one synchronistic event after another that night, and I know where I'm definitely going to be putting a lot of effort and energy, in the future.
Okay, one
Yeah,
final question. From your perspective, our world is changing in positive or negative direction right now?
both. Actually, yeah, it's that's the short answer. I can elaborate, but I'm more optimistic than pessimistic because I believe if I had to choose a time to be here with this mindset of wanting to take responsibility to solve problems and make equitable solutions, for all life on Earth, uh, I would choose this time. This is the time of the greatest opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to leverage the information age to actually sow the seeds of rapid, massive, radical transformation worldwide. We don't know how long the internet is going to last in this current form.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's something that the powers that be are going to be very happy to um, kind of wrangle in more. So just not in an apocalyptic way of thinking, but in a opportunistic and precautionary way of thinking. I think now is the time to do what Terence McKenna said and put the pedal to the metal with art, and embed these aesthetic and value shifts in compelling art that doesn't require a PhD to read the jargon of a fancy textbook, or even stuff like my tendency to be jargonistic and everything. Compelling art is my most hopeful, positive, um, you know, belief for a hopeful future, and the negative forces are accelerating rapidly in all spheres. So it behooves us to, yeah,
Okay, so
work hard.
I had a message that my disk is almost full. So